The night Elias Drummond got his acceptance letter to the Hartwell Conservatory of Music, his mother cried so hard she had to sit down on the kitchen floor. Not the chair, the floor, right there between the refrigerator and the recycling bin, still in her cleaning uniform, with the blue embroidered logo of Sterling Heights Property Services on the left breast pocket. She pressed the letter against her chest and rocked, just a little, back and forth, the way she used to when Elias was small and had bad dreams. He stood over her and didn't know what to do with his hands, so he put them on her shoulders and let her cry. "Mama," he said. "Mama, it's okay." "I know it's okay," she said. "That's why I'm crying." Her name was Cecilia Drummond, and she had cleaned other people's homes for 19 years, office buildings before that. She had worked 2 jobs when Elias was in middle school, the cleaning company during the day, and the front desk at a budget motel on Thursday and Friday nights. She had done this without complaint, or at least without complaint in front of Elias. He had figured it out later, the way children always figure things out later, when they're old enough to understand what the numbers actually mean. The Hartwell Conservatory was in Kingston, Ontario. It was small and particular and not very famous outside of music circles. But inside music circles, it was the kind of place people said the name of carefully, with a certain amount of reverence. It had a 3% acceptance rate for its composition program. Elias had applied on a Tuesday in November, sitting at the kitchen table with his laptop and his headphones and 3 years of recorded demos on a USB drive. And he had told his mother he was applying to a music school in Kingston, and she had nodded and said, "That's good, baby," and gone back to her crossword puzzle. He had not told her it was Hartwell. He had not told her because he didn't want her to hope. And now here they were. He had started playing piano when he was 7, on an upright Yamaha that a neighbor 3 streets over was giving away because it no longer fit in their living room. His mother had seen the listing on Facebook Marketplace at 11:30 on a Wednesday night and called a man from her church who had a pickup truck. And by Saturday morning, the piano was in the corner of their apartment living room, slightly out of tune and missing one of the black keys on the far right end, which didn't matter because nobody ever played that high anyway. Elias had taken to it immediately and completely, the way some children take to swimming and others to drawing. He didn't know why. The piano was just the first thing in his life that felt like it belonged to him, not something borrowed or inherited or handed down with conditions. He pressed the keys and sounds came out, and the sounds were exactly what he had pressed for, no more and no less. That felt important when he was 7. It still felt important at 18. By the time he was 12, the man from the church, a retired music teacher named Mr. Pierce, who had a neat gray beard and a habit of tapping his knee when he listened, had told Cecilia that Elias had something he couldn't teach. "I can show him technique," Mr. Pierce said, "but the hearing, what he does with what he hears, that's not from me. That came from somewhere else." Elias had been in the next room, pretending to do homework, and he had heard every word. He began composing at 14. Small things at first, loops and fragments, a melody he couldn't get out of his head, 2 chords that felt right against each other in a way he couldn't explain. By 16, he was recording on his laptop with a cheap USB interface and uploading to SoundCloud under the name Drummond Still, and people were listening. Not millions of people, but real people. People who left comments that said things like, "This one got me while I was on the subway and I almost missed my stop, and who made this? This is exactly what I needed tonight." He collected those comments in a notes app on his phone. He read them when things were hard. Things were hard fairly often. They lived in the East End of Hamilton, in a 2-bedroom apartment above a dry cleaner's, and the building had a superintendent who was slow to fix things and fast to raise rent. Elias worked weekends at a grocery store his first 2 years of high school and gave half his paycheck to his mother, who never asked him to but never turned it down either. He understood by then what the numbers meant. What he had, which was considerable, was music. And what music required, more than talent or equipment or time, was belief. He had believed in his own ear since he was 7 years old. Since the first time he pressed a key on that broken Yamaha and the sound came back to him pure and certain and his. That belief had gotten him here, to a kitchen floor in Hamilton, watching his mother cry into an acceptance letter from the Hartwell Conservatory, and Elias was 20 years old. He had taken a gap year to save money, and he felt, for the first time in a very long time, like something was about to begin. He arrived at Hartwell in September. The campus was smaller than he expected, a cluster of old limestone buildings set back from the water, with practice rooms that had good acoustics and bad ventilation, and a main recital hall with a Steinway concert grand that Elias stood in front of on his first day and did not touch, just stood there because he wanted to remember wanting it. The composition program had 14 students in his cohort. 11 were from Ontario, 2 from British Columbia, 1 from Quebec. All of them had grown up taking lessons. Most of them had parents who were musicians or music teachers. Several of them had attended private high schools with dedicated music facilities. They spoke about composers the way Elias spoke about them too, with familiarity and genuine love. But they also spoke about certain concert halls and certain teachers and certain summer programs in a language that assumed shared experience. And Elias spoke that language less fluently than he understood it. He didn't say much in those first weeks. He listened. He worked. The program director was a man named Dale Coburn, 50s, silver hair, a tendency to wear the same 3 sweaters on rotation. He had a professional reputation that Elias had read about carefully before arriving. A composer of some renown in the 1990s who had transitioned into teaching and administration and was considered by those who knew to be an excellent reader of talent. He was precise in his feedback and parsimonious with praise, which Elias respected. Being stingy with compliments meant they meant something when they came. The other faculty were a mixed group. There was a theory professor named Dr. Anita Fossey who had a gift for explaining counterpoint in terms that made structural sense rather than just procedural sense, and Elias liked her immediately. There was an ear training instructor named Mr. Bryce who was cheerful in a way that suggested he genuinely loved his work, and there was a visiting artist that fall, a producer from Toronto named Jasper Addo, who had worked on 3 Polaris shortlisted albums and who ran his masterclasses the way Elias imagined a good boxing coach ran his gym, with high expectations and no patience for excuses and genuine, almost fierce investment in the people in front of him. Elias had not expected to find a mentor. He had expected to find instruction. Jasper Addo looked at Elias's demo portfolio in the second week of term and said, "Who told you to play it this safe?" Elias said, "I don't think anyone told me anything." "That's the problem," Jasper said. "You've been making decisions based on what nobody told you not to do. That's not the same as making decisions. I'm going to need you to start making decisions." Elias went back to his practice room that evening and stayed until 11. The recital was in November. It wasn't the year-end showcase that came in April. This was the mid-year portfolio presentation, an internal event for faculty and students where each first-year composition student presented an original piece. It was the first formal moment, the first time the work became public within the institution, and everyone understood, without it being said explicitly, that it mattered. The pieces were announced in alphabetical order, which meant Elias Drummond presented fourth. He had written a 12-minute work for piano and string quartet that began in almost complete silence, a single low note held for 8 counts, and then built, slowly, through a series of overlapping phrases, into something that was neither jazz nor classical nor contemporary, but some combination of all 3 that felt like it came from inside him, rather than from any tradition he had borrowed from. He had played it for Jasper Addo twice, and Jasper had said after the second time, "Don't change anything." He had played it for his mother over the phone, humming the string parts, which she had found both impressive and slightly absurd. "You're humming like 4 different things at once," she said. "How is that possible?" "Practice," he said. The night of the recital, he sat in the 3rd row and listened to the 3 students who presented before him with genuine attention, because he was genuinely attentive by nature, and because it helped him not to think too hard about what was coming. The second student, a girl named Maya Stafford, whose facility for Baroque counterpoint was something Elias found genuinely astonishing. presented a piece that drew quiet murmurs of appreciation from the faculty row. Dale Coburn wrote something in his notebook. Elias watched Dale Coburn write in his notebook and thought, okay. When his name was called, he walked to the front, adjusted the microphone. The piece would be narrated in part, a device he had borrowed from spoken word and felt slightly defensive about, and looked out at the room. 14 students, 7 faculty. The visiting artist, Jasper Addo, sitting at the end of the faculty row with his arms crossed and his face neutral in the way that Elias had learned meant he was paying full attention. Elias said, "This piece is called What My Mother Carries." He had not told anyone the title in advance. He heard someone shift in their seat. Then he began. What happened over the next 12 minutes is difficult to describe in terms that don't sound inflated, because the truth is that the recital hall was small and the audience was 14 students and 7 faculty members, and that is not a large or impressive crowd by any standard. But the piece did what Elias had spent 3 months trying to make it do, which was to move through a listener the way a memory moves, without announcing itself, arriving at the back of the throat before you've realized it's arrived. The opening silence settled over the room. The low note landed. By the 4th minute, when the string phrases started overlapping, Elias could feel the quality of attention in the room's change. It was not something he could see exactly. It was more like a shift in air pressure. People stopped adjusting themselves in their chairs. Someone who had been writing in a notebook, he could hear the pen on paper, stopped writing. He had written this piece about his mother. He had written it about 19 years of cleaning other people's homes and a kitchen floor in Hamilton and an upright Yamaha with a missing key and a man from church who said the hearing can't be taught. He had written it about what it costs to carry something that no one around you recognizes as weight. By the 8th minute, when the piece opened into something that sounded almost like light. Not happiness exactly, but the quality of a room when the morning comes through the window at the right angle. Elias could hear that the room was very still. He finished. The silence after lasted longer than it should have, the kind that means something, rather than the kind that means the audience is catching up. Then Jasper Addo uncrossed his arms. Then the room came back. Afterward, in the hallway, a student named Petra Sinclair, one of the 2 from British Columbia, technically accomplished and a little reserved, stopped beside Elias and said, "I didn't know you could do that." He didn't know what to say to that, so he said, "Thank you." "No," she said. I didn't know anyone in the program could do that." He thought about that for a moment. He said, "I think people can usually do more than anyone knows." She looked at him in a way that was part skeptical and part something else, and then she said, "Your mom really cleaned houses." "She does clean houses," he said. Present tense. Petra Sinclair opened her mouth and closed it again. Then she said, "Right. Yeah. Sorry." Elias wasn't angry. He understood what she meant. She meant that she had built a picture of the kind of person who made a piece like that, and the picture she had built didn't include a 2-bedroom apartment in Hamilton above a dry cleaner's. He understood because he had spent years bumping into that picture. The one people carried around without knowing they carried it. The one that said certain things came from certain places and not from others. He was accustomed to being a thing people hadn't accounted for. In December, the faculty convened to allocate the following year's scholarships. The Hartwell Conservatory offered 3 named awards to first-year composition students. The Hargrove Award, which was full tuition and had historically gone to students with strong technical credentials. The Vail Prize, which was half tuition and was tied to demonstrated creative originality. And the Steinberg Fellowship, which was partial and came with a formal mentorship designation from a senior faculty member. Ross did not know any of this until after it had happened. What he knew was that in the 2nd week of December, he received an email from the registrar's office informing him that he had been awarded the Vail Prize, effective the following September. He read the email twice, then called his mother, who asked him what the Vail Prize was, and he explained, and then she was quiet for a long time. "Mama, hush," she said. "I'm having a moment." He hushed. What he didn't know until later, until January, when things began to unravel in the quiet, particular way that institutional things unravel, was what had happened in the faculty meeting where the decision had been made. He heard it secondhand, from Dr. Anita Fossey, who told him in a way that was careful and indirect but clear enough that he understood the shape of it. She told him because she thought he should know. He was not sure afterward whether she had been right. Dale Coburn had argued against the Vail Prize going to Elias, not loudly, not crudely, in the language that educated people in positions of institutional authority use when they want to be discriminating without appearing discriminatory, which is a language Elias had been learning to hear since he was a teenager, because it was useful to hear it even when it was painful. What Dale Coburn had said, apparently, was that the November recital piece, while technically interesting, showed a narrowness of reference that concerned him. He had used the phrase culturally particular in a way that was meant to sound like a stylistic observation. He had said that the Vail Prize had historically been awarded to students whose work demonstrated a breadth of compositional influence, and that while Drummond's piece was emotionally effective, he was uncertain it reflected the kind of range the faculty should be investing in. Dr. Fossey had disagreed. Jasper Addo, who had not been in the meeting but had submitted written comments, had apparently disagreed with enough force that his comments were read aloud twice. The vote had not been unanimous. Elias sat with this for a while. The part that stayed with him wasn't the criticism of his work, which he had considered and found wrong in a way he could articulate clearly to himself, even if he didn't choose to articulate it to anyone else. The part that stayed with him was the phrase culturally particular, because what it meant under the language was that he had written something from inside his own life, from inside his mother's life, from inside a community and an experience and a sound that was his own, and no one else's, and that this had been counted against him. He thought about the Yamaha with the missing key. He thought about the man from church who said the hearing can't be taught. He thought about his mother on the kitchen floor. He thought, the piece is not narrow, the listener was. He did not say this to anyone. He held it, the way you hold something sharp that you can't put down yet. And he kept working. He went home for the winter break and did not tell his mother about the faculty meeting. She made jerk chicken and they watched a nature documentary, and she showed him a video on her phone of a cardinal at the feeder in the backyard of one of the homes she cleaned, and the cardinal was very red against the white snow. And she said, "Look at him. He knows he's something." "He does know," Elias said. She went to bed early because she had a morning shift. Elias sat at the upright Yamaha. It had moved with them twice and was now even more out of tune, and played the opening of What My Mother Carries very quietly, so as not to wake her. He played it and then sat with his hands in his lap and thought about the following year, about the spring showcase, about what he wanted to do next. He wanted to go further in, not further out, toward whatever a faculty committee meant by breadth. Further in, into the thing that Dale Coburn had called narrow, and that Elias understood to be the only direction that meant anything. He had known this since he was 7 years old. He had just forgotten, briefly, in the way you forget things when institutions begin to speak. He remembered now. The spring showcase was in April, and it was a different thing from the November recital. The spring showcase was public, open to the wider Kingston arts community, advertised, attended by people who had no institutional stake in the proceedings. Local critics sometimes came. Alumni came. People from the city came because they had heard the Hartwell showcases were worth attending, which was true. Elias had 4 months. He spent them the way he had spent every serious creative period of his life, which was to say with a kind of manic, quiet discipline that looked from the outside like he wasn't doing much. He was in the practice room every morning by 7. He walked along the waterfront in the evenings when his brain needed to stop making decisions. He had long phone calls with Jasper Addo, who had returned to Toronto in December, but remained available in a way that felt like genuine interest rather than professional obligation. He ate badly and slept adequately and read a great deal and listened to music constantly. Headphones in while he walked, while he waited for things, while he ate. as though sound were a thing he needed to stay saturated with, or he would begin to dry out. He was writing a song cycle, 15 pieces for voice and piano, with optional string accompaniment. The voice was his own. He had not composed for voice before, and his voice was not trained, was not particularly beautiful in the classical sense, was rough in places and uncertain at the top of his range, and he had decided all of this was fine. The roughness was part of it. The uncertainty was part of it. He was not writing for the voice he wished he had. He was writing for the voice he had. The cycle was called Carry, and it was about what he called the invisible weight. The things that people like his mother moved through the world carrying, that no one acknowledged as a burden because no one outside a certain experience could see the weight at all. He talked to his mother about it once, obliquely. He said he was writing something about work, about daily work, about what daily work does to a person over time, the way it shapes them. She said, "Does it have to be sad?" He thought about it. "No," he said. "But it has to be true." "Well," she said, "if it's true, it probably has some sad in it. But true things usually have some other things in them too. People get that wrong. They think true means sad. True means everything." He wrote that down. He used it. April came. The showcase was held in the main recital hall. Elias was the third act of 9. He had been placed there by the scheduling committee, which was not Dale Coburn, and which had apparently argued briefly about whether to put him later in the evening, when the room would be more settled and the audience more engaged, and had decided, for reasons Elias didn't fully know, to place him third. He sat in the wings and listened to the first 2 acts, which were both excellent and both very different from what he was about to do. The first was a piano sonata in a post-romantic style that was technically impeccable. The second was a string quartet that had a playfulness to it, a wit, that the audience responded to with warm, genuine appreciation. Elias was going to walk out and sing. He had told almost no one about the voice component. Jasper knew. Dr. Fossey knew. Petra Sinclair knew because she had walked past his practice room on a Tuesday evening and heard him through the door and knocked and come in and sat down without asking and listened, and afterward had said quietly, "Don't cut that part. Whatever you do." He had not intended to cut it, but standing in the wings, listening to the string quartet's final note dissolve into the warm applause of a full recital hall, he felt something that was very close to what he imagined drowning felt like. Not terror, exactly. More like the sudden, comprehensive understanding of how deep the water was. He thought about his mother. He thought about the kitchen floor. He thought about a cardinal on a feeder, very red against the snow, knowing it was something. He walked out. The hall was full, not just students and faculty, but the wider public audience, 200 people maybe, the seats filled and a few people standing along the walls. The Steinway was positioned center stage. There was a single microphone stand to its left. Elias sat at the piano. He didn't introduce the piece. He had decided not to. He played the opening phrase, 8 bars, quiet, almost internal, the kind of thing that sounds like it's happening somewhere behind the sternum rather than in the room, and then he turned slightly on the bench, toward the microphone, and he sang. His voice was not what the room expected. He knew that. It was not a conservatory voice, not shaped and placed and resonant in the way that formal training makes a voice. It was the voice of a 20-year-old from Hamilton who had spent his adolescence listening rather than singing. And it had in it all the things that made it imperfect and all the things that made it real. He six mother's hands. He sang about the blue uniform with the logo on the left breast pocket. He sang about the kitchen floor and the letter, and the way she had pressed it against her chest. He sang about the Yamaha with the missing key. He sang about the man from church who said the hearing can't be taught. He sang about what it means to have a gift in a world that wants to decide, before it has heard you, whether you are the kind of person who gets to have one. He sang all 15 pieces. It took 37 minutes. Somewhere around the 6th piece, he became aware that the hall had gone very quiet in a way that was different from ordinary quiet. It was the quiet of people who have stopped thinking about themselves, which is the rarest kind of quiet in a room full of people. He did not look up much. He didn't need to. He could feel it. When the final note of the final piece resolved, A single piano chord, very simple, the kind of chord that sounds like an exhale. He sat for a moment with his hands on the keys. Then he lifted them. The silence lasted 4, 5, 6 seconds. Then the room stood up, not all at once. Not in the choreographed way of a standing ovation given out of obligation. Row by row, person by person. The way a field of wheat moves when the wind comes across it from one side. And by the time it reached the back of the hall, the whole room was standing, and the sound was something Elias hadn't heard directed at him before, which was the sound of 200 people who had been moved by something and didn't quite have words for what. He stood. He nodded. He looked at the faculty row, 7th from the left, back corner, and Dale Coburn was standing. His expression was complicated. Elias looked at it and thought, he knows. Whatever else is true, he knows. That was enough. After the showcase, in the small section in the lobby, Jasper Addo found him first. 37 minutes, Jasper said. And you had them for every single one. I had me for every single one, Elias said. They came along. Jasper laughed, which was not something he did often, and it was genuine. I'm going to tell you something, Jasper said, and I need you to actually hear it, not just receive it politely. Okay? Okay. What you just did is not what Hartwell made. Hartwell gave you time and a room with good acoustics. What you just did came with you when you got here. I need you to know that, so that when people try to take credit for it, you know the truth. Elias thought about this. A man from my church told my mother something like that. About hearing. Smart man. He used to fix the church boiler also, Elias said. He was good at a lot of things. He found Petra Sinclair across the room. She raised her glass of water at him from a distance, a small, private gesture, and he raised his back. Dr. Fossey shook his hand and held it for a moment and said, Your mother is going to need to sit down when she hears how tonight went. She'll sit on the floor, he said. Is that a family thing? It's becoming one, he said. He stood in that lobby for an hour, talking to people, accepting the particular kindness of being seen, and thought about calling home. It was late. His mother would be asleep. She had the early shift. He called anyway. It rang 4 times. Baby, she said, her voice thick with sleep. What time is it? Late, he said. I just wanted to tell you the show went well. A pause. How well? He thought about 37 minutes and a room going still and 200 people standing row by row like a field of wheat in the wind. Real well, he said. She was quiet for a moment. Then, I knew it. She said it with a certainty that had nothing to do with the showcase, that had nothing to do with Hartwell or the Vail Prize or the spring program or any of the particular facts of that evening. She said it the way she had always said it, the way she had said it since he was 7 years old, pressing keys on a broken piano in a living room in Hamilton, with the absolute, unmovable faith of someone who has been watching something grow for a long time and is not surprised to see it bloom. I know you did, he said. There are people who will tell you that talent finds its way regardless, that if you have something real, something true, it will rise no matter what is placed above it. This is a comfortable thing to believe, and it is not entirely wrong, but it is not entirely right either, because it leaves out all the weight. It leaves out the years of carrying. It leaves out the rooms where someone looked at you before you opened your mouth and decided they already knew what you had to say. What Elias Drummond carried into that recital hall in April was not just talent. It was 19 years of a woman in a blue uniform getting up before the sun and coming home after it, and doing this without complaint, not because the world was fair, but because her son was watching. It was a Yamaha with a missing key. It was a man from church who understood that some things cannot be given, only recognized. It was every room where someone had heard the word particular, used like a small, careful blade. He carried all of it up to a microphone in front of 200 people, and then he sang. If you have ever been told that where you come from limits what you have to say, if you have ever been in a room where you could feel the weight of someone else's expectations pressing against your chest like a hand, then you already know what kind of courage that takes. You already know it has nothing to do with being fearless and everything to do with being afraid and going forward anyway, because the thing inside you is bigger than the fear, and because the people who gave it to you deserve to have it heard. That's what Elias knew. That's what Cecilia Drummond knew on the kitchen floor in Hamilton, pressing a letter against her chest. It always was going to sound like this. The only question was whether the room was ready to listen.